Hi, everyone. Hope you can hear me now. So just a brief recap. Last webinar was Brief History of Food, Part 1. So basically, for more than 10,000 years, we've had a natural, unrefined, organic diet, and also a natural lifestyle with close contact to nature, etc. And for the last 2,500 years, the diet, although it was natural, organic, unrefined, hasn't been completely natural because of trading and conquering, where subtropical and tropical foods, plants, and cooking styles were brought to temperate regions. So the diet was natural, but it wasn't completely adapted to climatary conditions. So one of George Osawa's very important insights was the importance of eating indigenous foods that have originated in the same or similar climatic region. And the most important factor in that is latitude. So to come from a similar latitude, east and west, because the climate changes dramatically as we go north and south, but very little east and west, around the world. And by eating foods that are indigenous, then not only do we create strong health, but we communicate with the environment in which we live, which is the important point. So then the biggest turning point was the Industrial Revolution, which basically was the beginning of imbalanced nutrition because of two factors. Number one, the locomotive. So the Industrial Revolution started in Great Britain, then to Europe, then to the US. So by the early to mid 1800s, it really started to take shape here. And because of the locomotive, the steam engine, people could move around more easily. At the same time, factories built up, which interrupted eating habits, because the noon meal was the main meal throughout the world up until that time. But because of factories, people started to brown bag it to take food with them to work. And then it shifted to the dinner meal. But the other thing that happened is we had stone mills for grinding flour. And stone mills, we can adjust the coarseness. And in a stone mill, it preserves the quality of the flour because it's much more low temperature. But then they introduced steel roller mills. And steel roller mills then really changed the quality and the nutrition of flour. Plus, because of the Industrial Revolution, then everything went from a community, a local basis, started to become more centralized, and food refining increased. Now, of course, there was some refining before the Industrial Revolution, but it's not easy on a family or community basis to refine grain and refine flour. So there was to a certain degree, but it wasn't widespread. So basically, two things happened with the Industrial Revolution. One, it's the beginning of imbalanced nutrition because of refined grains, and our eating habits, family patterns became disrupted. Okay, that was that. The next big change that came is with World War I. With World War I, because food science basically developed as a result of our war effort. So protein-based nutrition was pushed in Germany in the late 1800s. But here, with World War I, some, so-called wise Army field marshal noticed that a lot of our soldiers couldn't fight well. They weren't well nourished. And if they were fed meat, they became better soldiers. So from that point, protein-based nutrition started to become pushed. And I can't remember the history of food groups. So we sort of went from 12 food groups to 7 food groups to 4. But the basic difference in the different changes in the food groups is that dairy and animal foods increased. Each time they changed the food groups, the animal and dairy foods were a higher percentage. Okay. Then the next big change that came is in DDT, 1940s to 1960s. Well, so DDT was introduced, which really not only introduced pesticides, toxins to a large scale, but anything that destroys pests also destroys our microbiome. Then at the same time, World War I, 1941 to 1945, during this period, two major things happened during the war. And that is, first, modern food preservation is the result of World War II, when we tried to create foods that would last indefinitely for overseas soldiers. Now, before this, we had food preservation for thousands of years, and the uniqueness of the food preservation in the past and present food preservation is dramatic, because in the past, food preservation enhanced the quality of the food in every way. So let's say you have a root cellar, storage vegetables, storage apples. I know this, specifically from an apple grower, they increase in nutrition month by month when they're stored. So from the end of the summer up until June the next year, the nutrition is actually increasing. When we sun-dry foods, we have vitamin D. When we pickle foods, we're creating unique nutrients that didn't exist before. So all of the methods of preservation, whether it's sun-dried, snow-dried, smoke-dried brings out more fat and was used a lot in colder areas to bring out more vitamin D in the food. So in every sense, the food that was preserved before had unique qualities, whether it was dried or pickled or stored in a root cellar. Well, the preservation as a result of World War II is made dead food that never changed. There were no bacteria, there were no yeast, there was no oxygenation, nothing happened in the food. It was 100% dead. And I saw this a couple of times. Someone who had a McDonald's hamburger and it was in their pocket for 14 years. They had a spring coat they stopped wearing. He bought 2 hamburgers, he ate one, put the other one in his pocket. 14 years later, he picks up the coat, reaches in the pocket, and there's a McDonald's hamburger, which is the same as the day he bought it. It didn't change because there's nothing on this planet that would even touch it. Not a mouse, not a rat, not a bacteria, not a yeast, absolutely nothing, because it's not food, it's chemicals. So the second thing that happened in World War II is the chemical industry developed for munitions in the war was used in agriculture and food processing after the war. Okay. So what happened is we had petroleum-based fertilizers, which created enormous surpluses of grains and beans. So what did they do with the grains and beans? Well, they fed them to animals, not their natural food, but they fed them to animals. Then we had all this animal and dairy foods. So then what did they do next? So Harvard University School of Nutrition created the Basic Four, which literally conquered the world. So they said animal foods, dairy foods, fruits and vegetables, and starches. Now, the implication is animal and dairy food should be 50% of our diet. We only have 4 things. One is animal, number 2 is dairy, so that's 50%. Fruits and vegetables, essentially, no one knew what they were anymore. Well, people knew apples, they knew bananas, they knew oranges. But, I started a scene and I worked there for many years. And I was astounded at how few vegetables people knew. But after I was, long out of the scene, and I'd go into a health food store and come up with a basket of vegetables, I had to tell the person at the checkout, what was in my basket, which I found astounding, because if you work in a health food store, you're much more enlightened, so to speak, about vegetables than, the average person. And even they didn't really know. And even now, as scene is still there, I go in there. And one day I came up with a daikon, and it was an Asian woman. And she asked me what it was. And I said, "You don't know this food?" She said, "No." I said, "Your family didn't cook it?" She said, "No." I could not believe it. Daikon, an Asian person who doesn't know daikon. This is how. So my point is, the basic four basically separated us from food, because food science promoted and then took food from food and broke it down to nutrients. So people didn't even know what food was anymore as a result of that. Then around the same time, 1953, the TV. I was 4 years old. I remember walking into my kitchen. All of a sudden, there was this noise. I said, "What is that noise?" She said, "It's a TV." Right? And all of a sudden, my peaceful childhood, our family meals became disrupted, because my mother thought, "How great, I can cook and, with in front of the TV, and we can eat with the TV on," and life changed. At the same time, 1953, Swanson's TV dinners were introduced. So the TV, and then together to complement the TV, we had TV dinners. So women didn't need to cook anymore. They could buy this thing, pop it in the oven, put it out in there. So these things were absolutely changing the world. Then 1955, McDonald's. The Golden Arches. I don't know now, but in the past, it was the #1 recognized symbol in the world, greater than the Catholic cross. Can you believe it? McDonald's, the Golden Arches, which basically took over and revolutionized food. Because when I grew up, we ate 21 meals a week at home. Everybody did. We ate at home. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Then I was a teenager. I had a little money in my pocket, 1 meal a week. I could go out, meet with my friends for dinner 1 night a week. So then it was down to 20. But by the early 70s, everybody had 15 cents in their pocket for a hamburger, right? So food changed dramatically. And I can't say the food we ate growing up was the most natural food, but it was food and it was home cooked. And we ate it together as a family. Okay. So then after, and in a diagnosis class, when we used to have, large classes on site, you could, I always broke people down into 3 groups: those born before World War II, those born during the war, and those born after. And if we're studying constitutional diagnosis, what you came into this world with, the constitutions, physical, mental constitutions of people born before the war are noticeably stronger than people born during the war. But again, the people born during the war are much stronger than people born after. And each subsequent, decade brought weaker and weaker people. So, the younger the people in the class, the weaker the constitution. And constitution is the single most important thing in longevity and also resistance to disease. So we really had a weakening of our species, of humanity, from the time of the Industrial Revolution. Then in 1970s, because DDT became banned by the early 70s, they needed something to replace it. So they replaced it with glyphosate. Is that better or worse than DDT? I don't know. I can't tell you, but glyphosate destroys our microbiome in the same way. Now, It's known now, it's been known for thousands of years in the Orient, at least in Oriental medicine, that we have two brains. One is in our gut, the other is in our brain, and the one in our gut controls our brain. Not only does it control our brain, it controls our nourishment, our immunity, our mood, pretty much everything, about our life, including our ability to interchange and interact with other people. Germaphobe means you don't have a good environment in your gut. In other words, if you don't have good environment, if you're not friends with the bacteria in your gut, you can be friends with the bacteria and germs outside. It goes together. So my saying, I love germs. Germs are my friends. All germs. I don't care. Right? Germs are my good friends, good buddies. At any rate, glyphosate, which is now used as a drying agent, desiccant, to dry, harvested grains. So it's so pervasive in everything, and it is destroying people's guts' ability to digest food and to get a good nutrition from the food, and also, but affecting people in every other way. How we relate to each other in the world is controlled by our gut. Then the next big change was 1986, the Vaccine Act, giving immunity to vaccine companies so they could spread their vaccines and increase them rapidly. Now, when I grew up, there's a handful of vaccines. And I was fortunate enough that my mother took me to a pediatrician who was an old-fashioned doctor who went by his experience and gut. And for my first children, I took them to him too, because I remember him, he was just a wonderful person. And I asked him, what do you think about, vaccines? Are they really necessary? And he said, well, if children were nursed at least 6 months, no, they're really not. If you don't want to vaccinate your kids, then don't. Now, can you imagine, this is a well-respected MD, pediatrician, saying if your kids were nursed, then you don't have to worry about vaccinating them. And at any rate, there was a handful or less of vaccines at that time. Now I've lost count to the number of vaccines. It's completely out of control, including giving a hepatitis B vaccine at birth or within the first 6 months of birth, a disease that's transmitted by sex and body fluids, to a baby. But at any rate, the other thing that was pointed out is autism. When I was young, I never heard of autism. Now it's like, 1 in 34 boys has autism, and everyone, everyone I'm sure knows at least one person, one kid who has autism, probably a whole lot more. Now, do I think vaccines are the only cause of autism? No, I don't. Do I think it's one of the causes? I think absolutely. I think there's a strong correlation, but other MDs have presented strong correlations with electromagnetic fields, and I think it's unfortunate. Not many people bring autistic children to me, but I've had the experience with more than a handful, and they respond. If their parents can get them to eat the foods, within 3 days, they start responding. The response in children to dietary change is dramatic. Now, this is a little bit off the subject, but there is an organization in Bucks County outside of Philadelphia called the Institute for the Development of Human Potential, a man by the name of Glenn Doman. And for 20 years running, 10 years, one of his directors was macrobiotic, a friend of mine, and next 10 years. So for 20 years running, the directors were macrobiotic. And he had something called patterning, and he had great success with brain-injured children. And he was, active around the world, and especially in Europe and Eastern Europe. And when I used to travel a lot to Europe and Eastern Europe, then we had a lot of shared clients. A lot of those people were referred to me. And in every case, the ones that did his patterning, which was extreme exercise, movement to make the nervous system developed together with macrobiotic food developed at so much better way. I mean, I could see it with my own eyes again and again and again, how happy the parents were that the changes from dietary change. So the point I'm trying to make, now we have autism, we have ADD, ADHD, we have bipolar, we have everything under the sun, but it's all traced back to the gut. I mean, when it comes down to it, because electromagnetic fields and lack of sunlight, right, and fluorescence and LED lights, they all affect our gut as well. So basically, since 1986, but then there was one other change, and that was high fructose corn syrup. High fructose corn syrup, which was introduced in the mid-70s, but by the mid-80s, all the food companies changed from sugar to high fructose corn syrup, right? They changed because it was cheaper than sugar. Well, every cell in our body runs on glucose. We eat complex carbohydrates and we break them down into simple carbohydrates into glucose, which fuels our body. So every cell in your body, including your brain, runs on glucose. High fructose corn syrup, fructose, fruit sugar, when it's isolated outside of fruit. In fruit, it's different because you have fiber and minerals and vitamins in the fruit to digest it properly, to metabolize it. But when you have isolated high fructose corn syrup, only the liver can metabolize it. That brought on a whole host of other diseases, including ushering in the obesity epidemic, which, as you know, more than 2/3 of people in this country are either overweight or obese. Well, you can see dramatic changes since 1986. So vaccines and high fructose corn syrup at the same time, together with glyphosate, together with fluoridated water. So you can see everything is piling up in so many ways, basically changing our species. Now, along with this, what happened is we lost our self-reliance. We lost our ability. See, one of the things that attracted me so much to macrobiotics, because macrobiotics is how to develop your ability to think and figure things out, how to become more self-reliant, how to take responsibility for your own health, your family's health. However, when I first started counseling, someone would come to me and they would do it or they wouldn't do it. If their family didn't support them, okay, they'd still do it. If their doctor told them no, they'd still do it. But now, if their doctor says don't do it, they don't. I can't tell you how many clients that came to me, they're happy, and then their doctor says, well, stop your macrobiotic practice till you're done your treatment. But the thing is, their treatment will work better with macrobiotic practice, and they'll have less harmful side effects. There's no reason not to practice macrobiotics together with medical treatment, but their doctor says no, people say no, that's it. Now it's even worse because family members say no and they say no. In other words, we've lost our physical and mental resilience. We've lost our self-reliance. We've lost our ability to think for ourselves. So everybody says, follow the science. And, I have a real issue with that more and more all the time because the science is wrong more and more. And science is always changing. Whatever they say, they change. In macrobiotics, we're talking about the same things for 10,000 years, not for 10 years. It's consistent. So then now the latest change, which is probably could be more devastating than any of the others, is fake foods, the Impossible Burger, or Beyond Burger, and all these fake foods that are being promoted to vegans, thinking that they're doing something better because they're not eating meat. However, besides the harm to the environment for the processing, for the monoculture and the glyphosate and the GMOs used, plus the excessive processing, healthy foods, first of all, there's 1, 2, or 3 ingredients. Brown rice, there's one ingredient, brown rice. Oatmeal, there's one ingredient, oats. When you said sourdough bread, you have flour, salt, and water. You got three ingredients. You got pasta, you have flour and water, right? But these foods have a countless number of ingredients. Most of them we can't know what they are because they're not food. And in any case, food is better. So I don't eat meat, but I would eat a real beef hamburger any day of the week before I would touch an Impossible Burger. And I mean that 100%. There's no way, right, knowingly or willingly would I eat an Impossible Burger, because the ratio of ingredients, it's so far out of balance to mess up our immune system. So what all of this thing has done and what's happened is diseases that were diseases of old age are diseases of children. Heart disease, arthritis, diabetes, obesity, all these things. These are children's diseases now. Then what happened since 1986? Vaccines and high fructose corn syrup. So the liver, to metabolize high fructose corn syrup, metabolize fructose, then becomes overloaded. And then people start to develop gluten allergies, wheat allergies, because the gluten grains, wheat, barley, and rye, affect the liver. They try to clean out the liver. Well, then they cause symptoms. People think that's unhealthy. It's really not. It's actually very healthy. But together with that, the other thing that's increased is allergies. I mean, I remember over the years, all of a sudden, everybody's talking about allergies. It's like, I'd go out and sit in a coffee shop, drink a cup of coffee. You couldn't help overhearing all these people talking about their allergies and allergy medicines and what they're doing. And it became rampant. But now it's autoimmune, which is just an extension out from where our body can't recognize itself properly, doesn't know what's good and what's not, and starts attacking itself. Attacking our pancreas to make diabetes, or thyroid to make Hashimoto's, or our joints to make rheumatoid arthritis, etc. So basically, we've gotten from thousands of years of eating a natural grain, bean, and vegetable-based diet with naturally pickled and fermented foods, having family meals together, being closely in touch with nature, having lots of physical activity. So all these things we'd say a macrobiotic diet and lifestyle, to in less than 200 years getting so far from nature that most people wouldn't want to know what to do if they're in the woods. I mean, I grew up in Northeast Philadelphia. So the street I lived on, there were woods, Tokenie Creek and Pennypack Park, in two directions from my house. So I grew up basically in the woods every day of my life, growing up to a certain age. My friends, we were out in the woods, we were in streams. There were caves, small caves there. We were caving, we were catching. I had a snake as a pet. So we grew up in nature in the woods, and it changed my life. But children now have no idea what food is or nature. So this is how far we've gotten. Now, so back to 2020s, macrobiotics, SHI macrobiotics, which is traditionally based and promoting the world's traditional cuisine to reintroduce what's natural and what's real as far as diet and lifestyle practices to get us back to some kind of reality again. And, Michio always talked about the golden age of humanity and the changing time, the crossing time between two groups of people, one who will live a more and more unnatural life relating on science, and others who will connect to nature and live a natural life. And that changing time is 2030 to 2040, probably 2034 or 2032 to 2036. And then for the next 400 years, we moved towards the next golden age of peace on the planet. So we were at this unique time in history. Plus, if you believe in astrology, the age of Aquarius, where all these things will become known, nothing will become hidden, started December of last year. So we're in this unique changing time. And as far as I can know, the best way to introduce these changes, bring back a healthy diet and lifestyle is macrobiotics, because it's not a diet, it's a lifestyle that includes a dietary practice. And the dietary practice is not a diet, it's a traditional way of eating. So here we are trying to move back to natural foods, naturally prepared, right? Naturally prepared it, before it gets to us and when it gets to us. So this is my brief history of food. We've come a long way in the wrong direction. So now it's time to go a long way in the right direction again. So if you have some questions, I'm happy to try and answer them.
All right, thank you so much, Denny, for that. So we are now at our Q&A section for this webinar. Time is now 4:32 Eastern. So we'll give about 10 to 15 minutes or so to address any questions. We'll be taking questions directly here on Zoom, and we'll also take some questions on Facebook Live. So I'll be monitoring back and forth from that. So as always, if you want to submit a question, there's a couple ways you can do so. You can either submit that directly to the chat here. I'm going to type in hello for those who are not familiar with the chat. You can send a question there where that hello is. I'm also going to allow individuals the ability to unmute themselves. I just ask that you wait patiently to be called upon, just so individuals aren't talking over each other. So if anyone has a question at this time, we can now start to take some of those questions. All right, looks like we already have one here. So Denny, you have said that baking produces dextrins. What about steaming?
Well, so baking flour, right, produces exposing grains to dry heat. So it creates dextrins. Roasting does as well. Steaming brings out more of the carbohydrate and then somewhat minerals. So when you steam greens, for example, they become more fibrous. Steaming is bringing out more fiber or carbohydrate in the food.
All right, thank you. Okay, let's see here. Just looking back and forth through Facebook. All right, so we have a question here from Facebook Live. Could you explain again why 1986 was a seminal year for vaccines?
Because the vaccine makers didn't want to make vaccines unless they were given blanket immunity from damage, harm caused by their products. So it changed everything as far as, vaccines. So before that, I mean, I don't know the exact number. I just know from a kid, and I just know now. And you were always able to. So for all my kids, I just said, it's against my religious beliefs. That's it. Never a question asked. None ever vaccinated. Now that's nearly impossible. Even my kids who don't want to vaccinate, if they want to have their kids in school, don't have a choice. So the number of vaccines has greatly increased. And the problem with that is, what keeps us safe is that our natural, immunity that has the ability to deal with all kinds of problems, or trying to protect ourselves and isolate ourselves. I think the whole direction of vaccines is dangerous. It's against self-reliance and self-responsibility and weakening. I did a lot of work with AIDS, HIV and AIDS. I worked with the group HEAL in New York. And I had a number of, people when I had a study house, live in my study house. So I had the opportunity to observe people over time. And I equated self-reliance with strong immunity. People that had strong immunity, nothing fazed them, were always self-reliant. And the weaker someone's immune system was, the more they were looking for the next person or the next thing that could help them. They gave up their self-reliance. And to me, it seemed like a clear correlation between self-reliance and immunity. So to me, this whole trend worries me that we're getting so weak that we will not be able to live a natural life without medical treatments. And I don't know about you. I mean, it's a choice. 15 years ago, I went to a doctor because he was a doctor friend and he insisted. And he said, okay, you're fine. And a year or two again, I reconnected with an old friend who's an MD who I knew from the 70s. So I decided to go see him and get a checkup. So basically, I mean, I lived my life, except for a dentist, without medical care for more than 50 years. And that's unusual now, but in the past, it wasn't unusual. It was the normal thing. That's what people did. So our over-reliance on medical treatment to me is very worrying, no matter what you think. And I'm not anti-vax, I'm not anti-medical treatment. I'm for people having health freedom, health choice. If you're going to certain countries where certain diseases are active, then you have a decision to make whether you think you can be safe on your own or you want to get the vaccine. In that case, I have no objection, of course.
Alrighty, thank you. Our next question here. Okay, what can one take instead of aspirin to thin blood as doctors always prescribe?
Well, there's a couple things. One, don't eat baked foods, fried foods, dried foods, very concentrated foods. That's number one. Number two, don't eat cheese or refined sugar. They become very sticky. They make the blood more sticky. Dairy foods, especially cheese and refined sugar, as well as refined carbohydrates. Then basically eat a grain, bean, and vegetable-based diet with liquid vegetable oils, natural sesame oil, and extra virgin olive oil, plus include daikon and shiitake mushroom, especially dried shiitake, but all mushrooms, in your cooking. And if you have a taste for it, eat natto. Fermented soy product that is an acquired taste for many people. So I think that's for the most part enough. If you are taking aspirin, you're trying to stop. John McDougall, an MD, did a newsletter on how to stop taking, how to reduce and stop taking aspirin. He recommended not stopping it cold turkey. So I would go to his website, John McDougall, MD, and look up that newsletter, see for his advice and follow that.
All right, thank you. And something that I just always like to let people know, and I usually include as a disclaimer when we provide this recording, these webinars are not intended to be direct counseling or medical advice as well too. So we want to make sure that you're still reaching outside of this particular session for any specific personal needs, that is. So let's take a look here at Facebook Live. And as a reminder, once again, you can send a question directly to the chat. I'm also just checking to see if anyone unmuted there. So sorry, things are a little, okay, all right. In Facebook, it looks like we have a question here. Okay, it looks like, what can people do to counterbalance the side effects, if they have side effects, from vaccines, including children?
That's not an easy question. I mean, the first thing that I recommend people do is steamed green apples, orange juice, and warm apple juice or apple cider with lemon to help people over COVID symptoms. There are a number of MDs that recommend a mixture of vitamins to use if you have COVID, to treat it naturally, which is quercetin, vitamin D, vitamin C, and zinc. And some of them have recommended taking that, that combination, that mixture for people who have been vaccinated. And if you have vaccine regret, then of course, don't get boosters. Everything is cumulative, for better or worse. In other words, the more healthy food you eat, the more you benefit. The more unhealthy things you do, foods and lifestyle practices, the more they take their toll. So, be repetitive in the right direction with healthy things. Yeah.
Question.
Yeah.
Can you repeat again the items that you use? The green apple, orange juice, the 3 items you mentioned at the very beginning.
Steamed green apples,
Steamed?
steamed green apples, freshly squeezed orange juice, and warm apple cider or apple juice with lemon. I mean, those things have helped a lot of my client with the symptoms in the beginning.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are they helping just for COVID or for anything?
That's
Like
my
a cold, like whatever.
it's my
Pneumonia.
no, not pneumonia. It's my universal remedy for flus.
Universal remedy for flu.
For
Okay.
flus, and COVID is in that category. It spreads in a similar way. Doesn't work for colds or other things, just specifically for flus.
Flu. So COVID is in the same category as flu?
It spreads according to, it replicates in a very similar manner to a flu. So the same things that help flu help COVID and vice versa,
Okay, thank you.
from what I understand from MDs I've listened to.
Thank you.
All righty. So time for maybe a few more questions here. If not, we definitely can come in for an early close and give some updates. So let's see what we have here. I think I saw another question. So Denny, what is your opinion of PSA readings that doctors are using to make people go for prostate biopsies? Mine is always just over the margin, not high, but just over. What should one eat for lowering this?
Well, dairy is the #1 cause of prostate issues, and all other animal foods after. After that, it's sugars, soft drinks, artificial sweeteners, like all the diet things, fried foods. So again, I'm going to refer to John McDougall. He's done a couple newsletters on early detection. He is not a fan, but see what I like about him. He speaks in plain terms, but he cites all the research. So you can go to the original research and then make your own decision. Now, one of the things, so soy products, especially non-fermented soy products, are very helpful for the prostate. That means tofu and soy milk and edamame. So I would include those as regular foods in your diet. So I think that's the best approach.
All right, thank you. I'm just taking a look again here at the Facebook live stream to see if there's anything else there, just so I don't overlook it. Okay. And just looking here, live here on Zoom, I don't see any other questions in the chat. I'm looking at the crowd here, don't see any hands up or anything of that nature. So I would say probably we can end here for our Q&A unless there's one final question. Just looking here. maybe if someone wants to unmute themselves so it can be quicker. Dina, did you have a question? I saw that you just unmute.
No,
Oh,
I'm good. I'm
Okay,
good.
great. Okay, thank you. Danny, did you have any closing remarks before I provide some updates for everyone?
No, the same as my usual, the ultimate guide to eating for longevity. This is your handbook to health, healthy eating, healthy living, and delicious, healthy cooking.
Yeah.
And
Best book ever.
thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we have 2 copies.
Thank you. That is great to hear. So it's really a practical handbook, and more and more people would just loosely adopt those practices. We would really turn our health around in a major way. So that's my hope. And anyway, thank you very much. And I think it's really important to know where we've come from, to know where we need to go again. And so look forward to seeing you next time, and happy holidays if I don't see you before.
This is the last of our free webinar series for the 2021 year. For those who typically show up for it, we'll see you again in 2022. Thank you so much. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye,
Thank you.
everyone. Bye. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Happy
Regards
holidays.
to Susan.
Will do.
Okay.
Thanks, Danny.
Thank you. Thanks, Ian. Okay. Bye, everyone.